terrifying story based on real events, a night shift in an American mall. It happened a few years ago, just before Christmas, when I was working as a night security guard at a shopping mall in a small town south of Chicago. I've always enjoyed the festive atmosphere when everyone is preparing for the holidays, decorating their homes, and just the general winter holiday spirit. That night was no different. I arrived for my shift, and the mall was empty. People had already gone home, and I stayed behind to ensure security. By 11 p.m., most of the stores had closed, and I began my rounds. It was a usual routine for me. The mall was large, and I often walked through empty halls and corridors, with the warm yellow lights from the lamps casting a glow on the floor, covered with the remnants of snow brought in from outside. The entire peaceful, almost mystical moment seemed to hide something more, something I couldn't explain. I was on the last floor when I noticed something strange. From a distance, at the end of the hallway, I heard a faint noise, similar to footsteps. It seemed like someone was wandering through the empty spaces. I got closer, and eventually convinced myself it was probably just sounds from the ventilation system or some small technical noise. But the closer I got, the more I felt a strange coldness, like there was more around me than just shadows. At that moment, I felt my movements slowing down, and my heart started beating faster. As I ascended another floor, I noticed that one of the doors was slightly open. It was a storage room. I usually checked these rooms, but it had always been locked. I stopped, trying to figure out what was going on. When I peeked inside, an eerie calm washed over me. There was only darkness inside, and pieces of broken glass on the floor, as if something had just fallen. I couldn't figure out what exactly, but there was a feeling that someone had been there recently. I closed the door and continued toward the exit. However, on my way back, I noticed something else. In the corridor, where only moments ago there had been silence, there were now strange sounds. I turned and saw that the lights were flickering. For a moment, it seemed like a store door had opened, although it should have been locked. I decided to check it out. This was my last decision of that night. As I approached the store, I felt the air grow colder. I entered and saw that none of the displays had been tampered with. But as I got closer to one of the shelves, I saw bloodstains on the floor. It was a dark, cold stain. I stopped and froze. Then, something rough touched my back. I turned around, but saw nothing. Just the empty store, the empty atmosphere. But my heart was pounding faster, and I felt my legs grow heavier. I turned to leave, and suddenly, I felt like something around me was changing. It wasn't just fear. It was real danger. I decided to leave the mall as quickly as possible. Running out through the main doors, I glanced back but saw nothing that could explain what I had felt. My shift ended and I left the mall. But what happened that night still haunts me. The next day, when I returned to work, I learned about a strange incident. On one of the floors, several items had gone missing, and one of the cameras had captured an unknown figure wandering at night. But no other traces, except for the blood on the floor, were found. My shift had been the last one for the year, and I never went back there. Since that night, I no longer work night shifts, and even now, when I think back to that night, my heart still beats faster. Everything was too real, too terrifying, to just be a figment of my imagination. A terrifying story, a road trip from Chicago to Los Angeles. This story took place in 2017 and became a nightmare for two friends, James and Emily, who decided to embark on a road trip from Chicago to Los Angeles. They were dreaming of an unforgettable adventure across America, thinking it would be a simple journey that would bring them closer together and allow them to see new places. They began their trip early in the morning, driving in an old sedan, enjoying every new landscape that appeared outside the window. This was their first big road trip, and they planned to stop at famous spots along the way to take pictures and enjoy nature. Usually, they planned to stop in different cities, but their trip was delayed because they didn't account for the time, and soon they found themselves driving through a remote part of California in the dark. Late in the evening, they were driving on one of the deserted highways when James noticed an old, abandoned gas station on the side of the road, one that appeared to have been in use for many years. It was surrounded by dense forest, and everything felt too quiet, almost like a scene from a horror movie. "We should stop here for a few minutes," James said, convincing Emily that they could refuel and stretch their legs. Emily wasn't sure, but she agreed. They drove up to the gas station, and James went to the old kiosk to buy some water. However, when he returned to the car, his expression changed. He saw something through the window that he couldn't explain. As he got closer, he saw two figures standing next to their car. They were dressed in dark hoods, and their eyes gleamed as if they weren't human. "James, what is that?" Emily asked, but he couldn't answer. One of the figures moved closer, and he felt his heart race. One of the figures began to say strange things, nonsensical phrases, but its voice was hollow and detached. "They're not here," the figure said, moving closer. Its hands slowly rose into the air, and suddenly, they vanished like fog, dispersing into the night air. Trying not to show his fear, James started the car, and the engine roared to life, but as they began to drive away, their hearts were still pounding. They kept going, trying to forget about it and not look into the rearview mirrors. However, after a few minutes, they noticed the darkness around them starting to change. It became worse when they saw what looked like red light coming from the forest next to them. James tried to stop, but the car refused to respond to the brakes. Everything around them became eerily silent. Even the sound of the engine seemed muffled. Suddenly, without warning, another figure appeared in front of the car, one of the ones they had seen at the gas station. It stood right in the middle of the road, unmoving, and once again began uttering nonsensical words, its eyes glowing red. At that moment, the car began to rattle uncontrollably, and James, sensing something terribly wrong, tried to speed up. But it only got worse. Their car suddenly exploded from a powerful impact. The aftermath was horrific. James and Emily found themselves in the dark on the side of the road, their car destroyed, and they couldn't even understand what had happened. The same figures appeared in front of them again, their darkness consuming the surrounding world, and they couldn't escape. By the time James and Emily regained consciousness, it was already too late. They were taken by the very same entities that had been chasing them. From that moment on, no one ever heard from their road trip to Los Angeles. No one could ever find their car, and strange, unexplainable events began happening on that road, confirming that those places had become home to forces beyond human understanding. This terrifying story is based on real incidents of unexplained phenomena that have been documented in various parts of the United States, where people have reported encounters with supernatural forces that seem to follow them. Night shift at the mall. Location: Chicago, Illinois, USA. Based on real events. In September 2018, for young employees at a shopping mall in Chicago, Jessica, Chris, Taylor, and Robert were working the night shift, completing their usual tasks of closing stores and preparing for the next day. They knew that the night shift, compared to the daytime hours, was much quieter. Almost no customers, just a few stragglers running into the supermarket or pharmacy, and some security guards patrolling. However, this night would be different. By 9 p.m., when the mall began to feel empty, Jessica, who worked at the register, started noticing something strange. At first, it was just a shadow that seemed to appear at the corner of her vision when she walked down the corridor between stores. She initially thought it was just her imagination, as working late nights could sometimes play tricks on her. Maybe it's just the lights, she thought to herself, trying to calm down. But when she returned to her station, her friend Taylor, who worked at the opposite end of the mall, curiously asked, "Did you hear that?" "I heard footsteps." Jessica froze for a moment, felt uneasy. All these sounds seemed to be coming from the same part of the mall, the area that was usually not frequented by anyone. It was an old, rarely used floor of the mall where old boxes and furniture were stored. "I'll go check it out," Jessica said. Taylor, although not a fan of risky situations, offered to go with her. As they headed toward the stairs leading to the upper floor, they heard those strange noises again. This time, they were much clearer, heavy footsteps, seemingly walking toward them. Jessica and Taylor quickly returned to the main floor to tell the rest of the workers what was happening. Chris and Robert began laughing it off, brushing aside their concerns. "It's probably just a janitor or some glitch in the system," they said. However, a few minutes later, Chris noticed something strange. The security system began to register breaches on that same floor. The security cameras showed nothing unusual, but the alarms were loud and persistent. "This can't be just a coincidence," Chris said. He decided to investigate. When he reached the quiet floor, it became clear to him what was happening. On the security screen, he saw something terrifying. A dark figure moving toward the camera. It was tall, with impossibly long arms, and it didn't look human. Not believing his own eyes, Chris ran back to his friends and said they needed to call security. But before he could press the button, all the lights in the mall went out. The darkness swallowed the entire shopping center. They could hear something heavy moving through the hallways, and it made the air turn cold. Jessica, Taylor, Robert, and Chris huddled together in the center of the mall. Suddenly, the dark figure appeared before them. It stood in the middle of the mall. Only the glow of the security camera screens, reflecting off the glass doors, illuminated the figure, and they saw that it didn't look human at all. They tried to leave, but the doors were locked. The figure began to move toward them, its legs making strange, silent steps. Jessica and Taylor, almost losing consciousness from fear, tried to find any way to escape. Robert and Chris frantically worked on the security system, hoping to send a signal for help. Meanwhile, the figure's breathing became labored, its arms stretching out in ways that seemed unnatural, twisted. If it hadn't been for the emergency signal sent through the security system, they would likely have stayed there forever. Security arrived minutes later, and by the time they did, the figure had disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. Further investigations revealed that this floor had been abandoned for a long time, and there had been several incidents there in the past. Psychological tests on the staff revealed that, even under stress, they could not explain what had happened. None of them could forget the horrifying moments in the shopping mall. Though the investigation provided no answers, the legend of the dark figure of Chicago continues to haunt anyone working the night shift in that mall. Since that incident, the mall has seen a series of unfortunate events, and even those who simply walk past it can feel the presence of this invisible force watching them.